In the late 60s and early 70s, the Zodiac Killer terrorized Northern California. Around 11 p.m. on December 20th, 1968, near Vallejo, California, 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen were shot and killed in a parked car. When police arrived, Betty Lou was found dead, her lifeless body lying on the ground about 30 feet from the car. Unlike her, David was still alive. However, David tragically died on the way to the hospital. At the time, no one knew this was the work of a serial killer. Zodiac's next murder took place at midnight on July 4th near Blue Rock Springs Park. This park was only a few minutes away from the previous crime. Zodiac approached a parked car with a flashlight. He shot 22-year-old Darlene Farron and 19-year-old Michael Mago with a handgun. Both were alive when police arrived on the scene, but only Mago survived. Mago could recognize and remember the face of the man who shot him. He described him as a young white man. He was about 26 to 30 years old, stocky, weighing 200 pounds or more. He had light brown hair and was about 170 meters tall. He had a broad face. An hour after the incident, police received a phone call from someone claiming to be the killer. The person on the other end of the phone said he had committed the murder at Lake Herman. On August 1st, 1969, 3 different newspapers received letters written in the same handwriting. The person who sent these letters claimed to be the killer of these murders. These newspapers were the San Francisco Chronicle, the Vallejo Times, and the San Francisco Examiner. These 3 letters were marked with a plus sign over the apartment, which was the symbol of the killer we would later call the Zodiac. Each letter also had letters and symbols that could be broken in a different way. Zodiac ordered these coded messages to be printed in the newspapers, or he would kill more people. That would put more fear in people, and Zodiac would become famous. But the cops were again mesmerized and printed the 3 coded messages in the newspapers with instructions that they should never follow. The Zodiac said that if these coded symbols were deciphered, his own identity would be revealed. On August 4th, a letter was received beginning with the Zodiac speech. It was in this letter that the killer first identified himself as Zodiac. On August 8, 1969, the 3 codes sent to the newspapers were cracked by a couple who were teachers and were able to crack the code much faster than the experts of the day. This is precisely why it was thought that this couple was the Zodiac Killer, but there was no proof of this. The passwords Zodiac kept in the letters were as follows. I like killing because it's fun, even more fun than hunting wild animals in the jungle, because it's the most dangerous animal to kill, because it gives me the most exciting experience. It is even better than pleasure. The best part is that when I die, I will be reborn in heaven, and the people I kill will be my slaves. I won't give you my name because you will help slow me down and stop me from collecting slaves for the other world. 1 month after the last letter, on September 27, 1969, in Napa, California, 22-year-old Cecilia Shepard and 20-year-old Brian Hartnell were attacked by the Zodiac. Cecilia saw a man hiding behind a nearby tree looking at them. He had the symbol of the Zodiac Killer on his chest. He had a gun, a knife, and a long rope. He threatened them with a gun. He asked Brian to tie Cecilia up. Brian did as the killer said, and the Zodiac tied her up. As they lay helplessly on the ground, he stabbed them both repeatedly in the back. Cecilia died in the hospital. But Brian survived despite being stabbed 6 times in the back. According to Brian Hartnell, the man was about 6 feet tall. He weighed between 100 and 120 kilos. He was molded. He saw brown eyes through the holes in the mask. Along with all the evidence, Brian had a note in his car written by the killer. The dates of all the murders and how they were killed. On October 11, 1969, just before 22 in San Francisco, just before California, post time, a taxi driver was shot in the head at the intersection of Washington and Sherry. A young girl across the street heard the gunshot and immediately called the police. The young girl told the cops that the killer was a white 25. He was a man in his 30s, about 5'5", stocky, wearing thick-rimmed glasses, with reddish hair and a military haircut. A nearby police car rushed to the scene, but in the confusion, the police officer making the announcement mistakenly announced the killer as an African-American male. Donald Fook and Eric Zelms, two of the police officers who arrived on the scene, were investigating the scene when they came across a stocky, 5'10" white male with a military haircut. Okay, this guy fit all the descriptions, but they were looking for an African-American man, not a white man, and these two cops made one of the biggest mistakes of their lives. They let the killer walk away because of a false report. Zodiac would later write a letter explaining the irresponsibility of the two policemen he encountered, how they looked him in the eye, and how they let one of the world's most notorious killers slip through their fingers with their relaxed demeanor. In addition to all this new information, there was another crucial point: a bloody fingerprint found inside the taxi, or a bloody fingerprint found in the letters that Zodiac threw out, and he himself said that he had also sprinkled fake clues around him, because the people who took his life would be his slaves, and he didn't want the police to slow him down. 2 days after the incident, the San Francisco Chronicle received a new letter in which there was a section of the bloody shirt of the taxi driver. Zodiac took responsibility for the murder, but the alarming part of this letter was not the bloody shirt that came with it. Zodiac was talking about how good it would be to hijack school buses and target very young children, and even sent detailed papers about bombs that could be attached to the buses in the same way. On April 20th, 1970, a new letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. Zodiac was saying his name, but in a cryptic way, the letter said, "My name is ... with symbols below it." This was an important development, but until 71, Zodiac continued to send junk mail, but these letters from Zodiac suddenly stopped in 1971 and never came again. Zodiac suddenly stopped writing letters in 1971 and did not write a letter for 3 years. Then in 1974, he wrote his last letter, mentioning that he had taken the lives of 37 people in total, and at the same time he added how funny he found the horror movie Exorcist, which came out in 73, and no news was heard afterwards. In 2002, with the advancing technology, the police were able to extract a particle genetic profile in one of the letters, but this profile was too inadequate to be used directly to find the culprit. But it was enough to eliminate many suspects from the list. So with all this evidence, who were the people closest to being the Zodiac? Gary Stewart was convinced his father was the Zodiac. He wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Animal Ever, and in the book there was evidence that his father was the Zodiac. His father matched the sketches drawn by two policemen, and the number of letters in the letter in which the Zodiac had encoded his name years ago matched his father's name exactly. The handwriting on his father's marriage license matched one of the letters written by the killer exactly. But not all of this evidence was completely true. First of all, the handwriting on the marriage license belonged to a priest from a nearby church, and his father didn't fit the Zodiac profile except for the sketch. Gary tried to match his father's DNA with the DNA found by the police, but the police couldn't come to a conclusion, and Jerry claimed that the cops were covering it up, and that was the end of it. One of the people who might be the Zodiac is Arthur Lee Allen, a claim made by Robert, who was a newspaper cartoonist and worked for one of the newspapers that the Zodiac sent letters to, and he is obsessed with finding the Zodiac, and he has been searching for decades for the Zodiac. When the Zodiac committed the third known murder, Arthur told his family that he had gone diving in the same lake where the murder took place. But when he came back home, he was covered in blood and there was a knife in his car. The police interrogated Arthur but could not reach a conclusion. 2 years later, in 1971, Arthur's friend Don made a confession, and Arthur told the police that before the name Zodiac was in the newspapers, Arthur called himself Zodiac, and Don even said that Arthur had memories of people talking about hunting. So the police went to Arthur for the second time, and Arthur told the police about his favorite book, The Most Dangerous Game. It's a book about hunting people, and it's also a book mentioned in the Zodiac's letters, and Arthur wears a wristwatch with the Zodiac sign on it. And Arthur's house is searched again, and there are dead bodies of random animals in the fridge. And Arthur is sentenced to 3 years in prison, but the Zodiac is inappropriate for small children. In 1987, Arthur's cellmate says that Arthur confessed to him that he killed the taxi driver. And in 1991, Vallejo, one of the people who Zodiac failed to kill, is spoken to, and he is one of the people who saw the Zodiac Killer unmasked. That's why Arthur's photos were shown to Vallejo, one of the big suspects. And Vallejo immediately says that this is exactly the man who stabbed me and shot at me. But Arthur was not caught due to lack of evidence. And he died of a heart attack at home a year later. So how could Arthur not be caught despite all this evidence, because the DNA taken from the stamps in Zodiac's letters did not match his DNA? But it is also known that Arthur had a habit of having others lick his letter servants. Arthur's fingerprints are compared with the bloody fingerprint from the taxi, but there is still no match. Arthur's previous letters and Zodiac's letters are also compared, but the handwriting does not match in any way. Therefore, the possibility of Zodiac being the killer was not clear. On top of that, he didn't match the sketch prepared by the police, so it was very unlikely that it was him. But interestingly, we know that Arthur went to prison in '71, and he was in prison for 3 years. And during these 3 years, no letters were received from the Zodiac Killer until '74, the year Arthur was released from prison. Besides all these suspects, there is another suspect named Kane, who is a cop. Kane had a big traffic accident in '62, hitting his head very hard. At this time, because of the concussion, his behavior changes greatly. He becomes a more aggressive individual. He has an instinct to kill. Kane's house is only 5 minutes away, especially on the evening the taxi driver was shot. And the more vital part is that Zodiac's phone calls are made right next to the police station. A phone booth. Kane knows how things work, and he went out. Maybe he was making a phone call. Kane hasn't been as suspicious as Arthur so far, but there's also an incident where Zodiac mentions babies in a letter, and there's only one person who can escape the Zodiac Killer, which is not an approved person, but a woman and a baby, the killer's mother. And the baby are picked up in the middle of the road and taken to a certain place. A mother and her baby jump out of the car when she takes a bend right when she says she killed them while speeding. Not exactly some of the documents that relate to the Zodiac, but the woman who lived through this is one of the people who sees it as the most difficult, and the person she identified is Kane himself. Now there is an incident that Jerry's father, who completely matches the robot picture drawn by the cops who saw the killer, went swimming where the murders happened. Arthur returned. His knife was covered in blood. Frozen animal corpses were found in his house. Bomb fragments in his house. It was found that Zodiac had already written letters about bombs. And then there is Kane, the police officer whose events were closest to his mental health, along with the proximity of his home. I think we should ask the question, was the Zodiac Killer a person? Most likely, as his friends said, the real Zodiac was Arthur, and after committing the first murders, his reputation began to spread. So Gary's father found such an opportunity, and the taxi driver shot him in the head. Kane tried to imitate it, because he had already suffered a concussion, and he was mailed this way. Zodiac's reputation continued in 2006, again the case when it opened. Everyone started saying that he was the Zodiac Killer, and there were a lot of fake reports to the police. I'm Zodiac. Why is it a good thing to be one of the best killers ever in history, and one of the killers who can't be found? People don't do anything at home, their lives don't go away in any way, and their lives are very bad. All they can do is maybe go to jail and take advantage of the food there and put a big reputation on them. But this is still going on. Zodiac sent a lot of letters during his time, and many of them were encrypted. 3 of these encryptions it is still unresolved, which until a month ago, 1 letter was decrypted. That's the subject of the other video.